February 27, 2026, Albuquerque, New Mexico. 11 o'clock in the morning, a 68-year-old man left his house for a walk. He didn't take his cell phone. He didn't take his prescription glasses, the ones he could barely see without. He left no note. He told no one. He left behind his ID, his documents, and every digital trace that defines a human being in the 21st century. But he took something unusual for a simple afternoon stroll, a loaded .38 caliber revolver, and a lifetime of carrying the deepest secrets of the Pentagon. This was not a disoriented elderly man. The figure at the center of the silver alert, issued by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety, was Major General William Neil McCasland. 2 stars, former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, the AFRL. A man who, for decades, served as the supreme arbiter between what science could reveal to the world and what needed to be buried forever. Think about what that means. The AFRL is the technological heart of the United States Armed Forces. It is where the drones that rewrite wars are born, where directed energy weapons are developed, where next-generation propulsion systems are tested, and where space programs the public will never see are quietly deployed. McCasland wasn't just an officer at that place. He was the man who decided what existed and what didn't, and now he had walked into the mountains with a gun. The search that followed was massive and silent at the same time. FBI teams were activated within hours. Special units from Kirtland Air Force Base, a facility hosting some of the most classified programs in the Department of Defense, less than 10 miles from the Sandia Mountains, were mobilized. Infrared drones swept the terrain. Search dogs were brought to altitudes that normally only experienced mountaineers reach. The U.S. intelligence community held its breath, not over the whereabouts of a retiree, but over what this man knew, because Neil McCasland wasn't just a general. He was the central node of a web of secrets connecting the X-37B spaceplane program, the leaked John Podesta emails, the suppression of clean energy technologies, and the greatest classified debate in modern history, what governments actually know about unidentified aerial phenomena and why they chose not to tell us. Over the next hour, you will understand why the disappearance and death of a single man can shake structures that seem unshakable. You will learn about the MIT that shaped the genius, the secret laboratories he commanded, the emails that exposed him to the world, the satellites he helped build that watch every square mile of this planet, and the bitter irony that in the end, those same mountains where he walked were the one place where all that technology seemed to fail. If this kind of investigation makes you see the world differently, hit like right now and subscribe. The unseen key exists to reveal what official reports bury in the final pages. Let's start at the beginning. To understand what McCasland went to face in those mountains, we need to understand who he was. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Decades ago, a young military officer walks the corridors of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, with a very specific objective, not simply to understand how space works, but to learn how to dominate it. William Neil McCasland earned his doctorate in astronautics from MIT, but what the academic records don't tell you is the nature of what he studied inside those laboratories. His declared specialty was spacecraft control and the navigation systems that form the backbone of global GPS. That system you use today to find a restaurant or an emergency exit. But for the Pentagon, GPS was never about finding restaurants. It was about having the ability to target any point on Earth's surface with surgical precision from the vacuum of space. In real time, without the target ever knowing it was being watched. There is, however, a detail that official records rarely emphasize. At MIT, McCasland immersed himself in plasma physics and electromagnetic wave manipulation. For those unfamiliar with these fields, plasma is the fourth state of matter, the state in which ionized matter behaves in ways that defy textbook physics. And whoever masters plasma potentially masters the propulsion of the future. Why does that matter? Because for decades, rumors have circulated in aerospace, engineering circles that advanced propulsion vehicles. Some of them, tied to classified test programs, use plasma envelopes around their hull to simultaneously reduce aerodynamic drag and radar signature. A vehicle flying inside a sheath of ionized plasma appears on sensors as something between a meteor and a digital ghost. McCasland didn't just study those principles. He built his career on them. Over the decades that followed, McCasland climbed the military hierarchy in a way very few manage. Not through the battlefield, but through laboratories. He was not a war general. He was a science general, and that distinction is fundamental to understanding the power he accumulated. Under his command at the AFRL, he selected which technologies would advance to production, which would be held in classified status indefinitely, and which would simply cease to exist in official records. That last category has a name in the internal environment, the limbo. Projects sent to the limbo are not cancelled. They are transferred to special access programs. Programs so classified that not even Congress has automatic visibility into them. During his tenure, the AFRL became the operational cradle of directed energy weapons, high-powered lasers capable of disabling satellites in low Earth orbit without firing a single conventional round. The cost of those weapons is not measured in dollars. It's measured in layers of classification. But it was one specific line on his resume that transformed McCasland from a powerful general into something far rarer, a living, credible witness to something most governments still treat as science fiction. And that line takes us to 2016, to a set of leaked emails that permanently altered the course of his public history. October 2016, less than a month before the American elections, WikiLeaks published tens of thousands of emails from John Podesta, former White House Chief of Staff under President Bill Clinton and, at the time, chairman of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. The world focused on the political emails, but buried inside that avalanche of data, intelligence researchers, independent journalists, and defense analysts found something that had very little to do with partisan politics. They found McCasland's name in messages exchanged between Podesta and Tom DeLonge, the former Blink-182 guitarist who had, surprisingly, become one of the best-connected lobbyists in the aerospace disclosure industry. Major General William Neil McCasland was described in specific and revealing terms. He was called the Golden Link. The description in the emails went beyond a code name. McCasland was identified as the man who not only knew of the existence of recovered materials of unknown origin, but was actively involved in figuring out how to introduce those technologies to the private sector without triggering a collapse of existing social and economic structures. Think about the magnitude of that statement for a moment. We are talking about a two-star general on active duty, commanding the technological heart of the U.S. Air Force. Being described in private emails as the architect of a technological transition the public didn't yet know was necessary. He wasn't a vague informant. He was a controlled disclosure strategist. The messages revealed something even more disturbing. McCasland was troubled, not by the secret itself. He had sworn to protect it. He was troubled by the stagnation. He knew that while the world kept burning oil and depending on 20th century energy infrastructure, technologies capable of solving that equation existed in hangars under his command. In the emails, he is described as someone who believed that absolute secrecy had an expiration date, that when the right moment arrived, the transition would have to happen, and that it was better managed than left to explode out of control. But by voicing that view, even in private conversations with figures connected to power, McCasland crossed an invisible line. In the vocabulary of American intelligence, there is a concept called internal vector risk, when someone built by the system begins to question the durability of that system. It is at that moment that the keeper becomes the watched. From 2016 onward, regardless of any direct action, McCasland's name was on the public map. Researchers, journalists, transparency activists, and inevitably foreign intelligence agencies now knew of the existence of the Golden Link. The man who had previously operated exclusively in the shadows had been pushed, willingly or not, into a dangerously exposed zone, but the bigger bomb was still coming. Because the project McCasland most wanted to protect, the one the Podesta emails only grazed, wasn't in any terrestrial laboratory. It was in orbit. Imagine a spacecraft the size of a van, no crew, capable of orbiting Earth for years. That's right, years, without landing, capable of shifting orbits unpredictably, executing maneuvers that defy the tracking models of every civilian space agency on the planet. And when it finally does land, doing so autonomously on a Florida runway while the world continues without knowing exactly what it was doing up there. This is the X-37B, and Neil McCasland was one of the strategic architects of that program. The X-37B flew its first mission in 2010. Since then, the vehicle has completed 7 known missions, the most recent lasting more than 900 consecutive days in orbit. 900 days. 2.5 years flying over our heads, executing missions that the Air Force, and later the US Space Force, describe as reusable technology tests. But aerospace engineers who studied the X-37B's orbital maneuvers across its missions reached conclusions that the official statement doesn't explain. The vehicle executes orbital maneuvers that would require, with conventional chemical propulsion, a volume of fuel that simply wouldn't fit inside its 29-foot frame. That led independent researchers, including groups affiliated with the Secure World Foundation and the Aerospace Security Project, to publicly ask, what kind of propulsion is being tested inside that thing? The most likely answer, according to propulsion specialists who spoke with outlets like Aviation Week and Space Technology, is Hall-effect thrusters, ion propulsion engines that use electric and magnetic fields to accelerate ionized xenon and generate continuous thrust for far longer periods than any chemical propellant. They are quiet, extraordinarily efficient, and leave a completely different signature on conventional tracking sensors. McCasland didn't just know about this. He oversaw the development of systems integrated into that program. But there is one element of the X-37B program that rarely surfaces in conventional analyses: its passive surveillance capability. Hyperspectral sensors on board the X-37B is part of experiments confirmed by the Air Force in earlier missions are capable of identifying energy signatures on the surface with resolution sufficient to detect the difference between a nuclear plant operating normally and one running in fissile material production mode. This is not science fiction. This is the cutting edge of American technical intelligence, and McCasland knew every inch of that system. The paradox that begins to form here is deeply unsettling. The man who built the eyes that watch the entire planet disappeared in mountainous terrain without leaving a trace detectable by those same systems. Either he knew every blind spot, or someone who controls those systems didn't want him found quickly. But before we arrive at that February morning, we need to understand what happened in the years between the Podesta emails and the disappearance. Because in that period, something changed profoundly in Neil McCasland's behavior. Between 2016 and 2026, the world of UAP disclosure underwent a transformation without precedent. In 2017, the New York Times published the investigation that revealed the existence of the AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a secret Pentagon program dedicated to studying unidentified aerial phenomena. The story came with naval intercept videos showing objects executing maneuvers physically impossible for any known human technology. The US government, for the first time in decades, did not deny. It confirmed the existence of the videos and admitted it didn't know what they were. In 2020, the Pentagon formally declassified 3 videos known as FLIR-1, Gimbal and Go Fast, recorded by U.S. Navy pilots. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence published the first official UAP report. In 2023, former intelligence officer David Grush testified before Congress that the United States possessed materials and vehicles of non-human origin. To the general public, all of this felt like news. To Neil McCasland, it was the slow, controlled opening of a vault he had helped lock decades earlier. People close to the general described, during this period, a gradual shift. The methodical strategist, the cold and calculated scientist, began to display something that didn't fit his profile. Impatience. Not the emotional impatience of a man in crisis. But the calculated impatience of someone who realizes that the window for a course correction is closing. Accounts from people who were around him in the final years before his disappearance describe a man who had adopted rigorous counterintelligence protocols in his personal routine, and this was not paranoia. It was professionalism applied to daily life. The electronic warfare specialist who knew exactly how cell phones can be turned into passive listening devices, who understood the capabilities of satellites in orbit, treated his personal electronics as potential Trojan horses, not because he was breaking his loyalty, but because he knew, better than any journalist or outside analyst, what the system was capable of doing when it decided to pay attention to someone and something. In those final months of 2025 and early 2026 had made the system pay attention to him. New Mexico is not just any state in the geography of American secrecy. Within its borders sit some of the most sensitive facilities of the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque houses the Nuclear Weapons Management Center and cutting-edge research in lasers and directed energy. Holloman Air Force Base operates high-performance aircraft test programs. And just 2 hours by road, in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, lies Trinity Site, where the first atomic bomb was detonated in 1945. For a man like McCasland, New Mexico wasn't just where he lived. It was a memory map of decades of career. In the months leading up to his disappearance, reports suggest McCasland had begun taking regular hikes in the Sandia Mountains, rugged terrain, with elevation changes exceeding 10,000 feet, filled with rock formations that create natural interference for radio and GPS signals. Geologists familiar with the region point to metallic mineral deposits that affect electromagnetic propagation at certain frequencies. For someone who built global surveillance systems, mapping the geomagnetic anomalies of a mountain range is not eccentric. It is tactical. He was locating the blind spots in the very map he helped draw. There is a theory circulating among intelligence analysts who followed the case closely, and it must be presented as theory, not established fact. McCasland may have been finalizing a technical dossier detailing how next-generation energy technologies, specifically compact fusion systems and wireless energy transfer, could be integrated into the American civilian grid by bypassing the corporate monopolies that benefit from the current energy status quo. If that document existed, and nothing categorically confirms or denies it, McCasland had transformed from a system guardian into a direct threat to its economic architecture. What we know for certain is that on the morning of February 27, 2026, he left home without the instruments that define a traceable human being in the 21st century. And he walked into the mountains with an analog revolver and decades of knowledge that no satellite can capture. Let's reconstruct what we know about that morning based on verified records. At 11 a.m., McCasland left his Albuquerque residence. Neighbors who saw him regularly reported nothing unusual the day before. No argument, no suspicious visitors, no external sign of crisis. His cell phone was found at home. His prescription glasses, without which he had severe difficulty seeing in open terrain, were also left behind. The .38 caliber revolver registered in his name disappeared with him. The first hours were ones of family uncertainty. When the afternoon passed without his return, the alert was triggered. The decision to issue a silver alert, a specific alert for missing elderly persons, was made by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety. But internally, within the Department of Defense, the activations were of an entirely different nature. Kirtland Air Force Base was notified within the first hours. The FBI entered the case rapidly, an uncommon speed for a disappearance that, in the official narrative, was that of an elderly man in a possible medical crisis. FBI involvement in a silver alert is rare. It indicates that authorities had additional information that the public statement did not reflect. Search operations focused on the Sandia Mountains, suggesting there was some directional indicator, a traffic camera, a witness account, a trail the dogs tracked before it went cold. The terrain is treacherous. Ravines, dense vegetation at lower elevations, bare exposed rock at higher ones, temperatures that drop sharply after sunset. The weeks that followed were ones of operational silence. Local media covered the disappearance through the silver alert angle. National media largely ignored it. Only specialized defense publications and a handful of independent investigative channels connected McCasland's name to his background at the AFRL and the trail of the Podesta emails in independent aerospace monitoring communities, groups that track radio frequencies, radar signatures, and unusual flight patterns. Reports emerged of anomalies over the Sandia quadrant on the night of his disappearance. Those reports were not confirmed by any official source, but they were also not investigated or publicly refuted. They remained, like much of this story, in the limbo. March 12, 2026, 14 days after the disappearance, search teams located the body of General William Neil McCasland in a remote, difficult-to-access area of the Sandia Mountains. New Mexico authorities issued a brief statement. They confirmed the identity. They reported that no immediate signs of foul play were found. They did not immediately release the cause of death, citing the forensic investigation process. And then what followed was something that, for anyone familiar with the institutional culture of the U.S. Department of Defense, said more than any press release ever could. Silence. Not a single major aerospace corporation that held contracts under McCasland's oversight issued a statement of condolence. No official AFRL spokesperson made public remarks. No congressman serving on the Intelligence and Defense Oversight Committees issued comments. In Washington, high-level silence is a directive, not an omission. In the intelligence environment, this kind of coordinated response has a name: narrative containment. When an event can connect dots, the system prefers to keep disconnected. The default strategy is not denial, which generates curiosity, but active silence. Let the event fade from the news cycle for lack of feeding, while internally, the security protocols are executed. What those internal protocols likely executed in the hours and days that followed includes, and this is based on documented procedures for the death of personnel with special access program clearances, the review and reclassification of documents that referenced his direct involvement, the audit of digital systems he accessed outside official networks, and an assessment of what, if anything, he may have transferred or communicated in the weeks before his disappearance. McCasland's personal office was, according to unconfirmed reports, accessed by federal agents within hours of the disappearance being confirmed. What they sought was not evidence of a crime. It was the inventory of a vault whose keeper had walked away without leaving the key. To properly contextualize McCasland's death, we need to step back and observe a pattern that independent intelligence analysts and investigative journalists have begun documenting with increasing rigor over the last decade. The pattern goes by different names, depending on who is analyzing it: scientific pruning, vector silencing, special access legacy management. The mechanism regardless of the name, is the same when a specialist with access to special access programs begins displaying behaviors suggesting an intention to disclose, voluntary or not. A series of events tends to follow. McCasland's case does not stand alone in recent history without making causal assertions, which would be irresponsible without direct evidence. It is worth documenting a context that national security researchers have flagged as a statistically uncommon pattern. Over the last 10 years, at least 4 other former officials with confirmed access to advanced aerospace research programs died in circumstances that generated formal questions. In at least 2 of those cases, family members filed requests for additional investigation with the FBI that did not result in formal proceedings. In the other 2, cases were closed with natural or accidental cause determinations before any independent investigation could be conducted. The Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, a real American law, still fully in force, allows the government to classify any patent that poses a risk to national security for an indefinite period. Estimates based on FOIA requests suggest that more than 5,000 patents are currently classified under this act, many of them in areas of propulsion, energy, and communications. McCasland had direct access to knowing which those patents were. He knew which technologies existed, which were viable, and which were being suppressed. That kind of knowledge has no price and no quiet retirement. We are not claiming McCasland was murdered. We are documenting the context in which he lived, the historical patterns that surrounded him, and the questions that competent authorities have an obligation to answer publicly. The difference between responsible investigative journalism and conspiracy theory is precisely this: present what is known, contextualize what is unknown, and resist the temptation to fill the gaps with certainties that don't exist. What does exist, in fact, is a gap, and it is shaped exactly like a 2-star general who walked into the mountains and never came back. In the days following the confirmation of McCasland's death, a strange phenomenon began emerging in encrypted networks, closed technical forums, and independent research communities in applied physics. Fragments of technical files, diagrams, research note-formatted annotations, conceptual schematics began circulating under the title The Neil Files. The content described concepts that the engineers who analyzed them identified as related to zero-point inertial navigation systems and electromagnetic field configurations. For drag reduction in hypersonic propulsion, these documents have not been verified as authentic. There is no way to confirm they originated from McCasland or his inner circle. But there is also no way to ignore the timing and the specific technical content which, according to independent specialists consulted by outlets like The Debrief, an American publication covering defense and science investigations, is consistent with the state of the art in advanced propulsion research. The question those fragments raise is not whether they are authentic, it is whether McCasland, as the strategist he was, had left a digital insurance policy, a seed of information planted in locations that standard containment protocols could not fully reach. In the intelligence world, this is called a dead man's switch, a mechanism that activates automatically in the operator's absence. It is a documented practice in high-exposure environments, ensuring that critical information escapes into the public domain should something happen to the person who holds it. Regardless of the authenticity of the circulating fragments, McCasland's legacy has already produced a measurable effect. His story has accelerated public pressure for transparency about the programs he commanded. In congressional hearings held in 2025 and early 2026, legislators directly cited the need to create protection mechanisms for former special access personnel who wish to cooperate with congressional investigations. The keeper went silent. But the structure he helped build is for the first time in decades being loudly questioned in the corridors where decisions are made. To understand what makes McCasland's death particularly significant in the current political context, we need to grasp the speed at which the disclosure environment around advanced aerospace programs has shifted in recent years. In July 2023, David Grush, a former intelligence officer with verified credentials and confirmed access to special access programs, testified before Congress that the United States possessed materials and vehicles of non-human origin. This was not an anonymous claim in an internet forum. It was sworn testimony before the House Oversight Committee with whistleblower legal protection. Grush was not alone. Ryan Graves, a U.S. Navy combat pilot, testified that UAP encounters were routine in his squadrons and that the institutionally enforced culture of silence and ridicule prevented the proper reporting of those events. David Fravor, commander during the famous 2004 Tic Tac incident, reaffirmed the reality of what he and his crew observed: an object with no visible control surfaces, no identifiable propulsion, executing maneuvers that defy our understanding of physics. Congress, pressured by those testimonies and a series of controlled leaks, advanced versions of the UAP Disclosure Act in subsequent national defense authorization bills. The law compels the executive branch to declassify and deliver to Congress documents related to historical UAP programs and associated materials. McCasland was alive when this process accelerated, and he potentially had more context than any other civilian or active-duty military figure to answer the questions. This process was raising. His death in March 2026 removed from the board the most qualified witness, available at exactly the moment when the board was being turned upside down. February 27, 2026 to today. What do we know? What can we responsibly claim? And what does this story, taken as a whole, tell us about the world we live in? What we know: William Neil McCasland was one of the most senior and influential officers in the history of the Air Force Research Laboratory. His career spanned decades of research and oversight of technologies that defined the global balance of power, from GPS to directed energy weapons, from the X-37B to electronic warfare. He was documentably connected through the Podesta emails to discussions about the controlled disclosure of advanced technologies and materials of unknown origin. What we know: he disappeared under conditions that, to any experienced investigator, do not fit the profile of a medical episode. He walked into the mountains like a man with a purpose, and he was found dead 14 days later. What we know: the institutional silence that followed was disproportionate to what would be expected for the death of a two-star general with decades of national service. What we don't know, and what any honest investigation must acknowledge, there is the precise cause of his death, what he did in the hours between leaving home and being found, and whether any external agent was involved in any aspect of the events. Those questions need answers, and the competent authorities have an obligation to provide them. What this story teaches us is broader than any individual case. It teaches us that access to knowledge, real knowledge, not authorized knowledge, carries a price. That the secrecy structures built to protect national security can, under certain circumstances, be used to protect other things entirely. And that the distance between classified for security reasons and classified for economic or political convenience is far shorter than official statements suggest. McCasland lived that contradiction. He was built by the system, rose within the system, and apparently reached a point where the system and his own conscience began pointing in opposite directions. What he did with that, in the final hours of his life, is the mystery the Sandia Mountains keep. But the trail he left behind, in the leaked emails, in the programs he oversaw, in the congressional hearings his story fuels, is a trail that no containment protocol can fully erase. The keeper of the keys is gone, but the doors he knew still exist. And now, more people than ever know those doors exist and are searching for ways to open them. If you've made it this far, you are part of that process. The context you carry from this video is not trivia. It is the kind of understanding that shapes citizens capable of asking the right questions to the right people at the right moments. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. The algorithm doesn't decide what matters. You do. General Neil McCasland chose the horizon. In doing so, he ensured his name would never be forgotten and that the questions he could not answer in life would continue, through us, to be asked. Thank you for following this investigation to the end. The Unseen Key returns with the next file. Until then, keep questioning.